Okay, 7 o'clock in Gardner, Kansas. Call the meeting to order. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Good evening, everyone. We've got a full house tonight. That's great to see. We've got a full agenda. So we will start. We have some presentations. Our first presentation is the 2022 Audit and Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. Finance Director Wolf.
Good evening, Council, Mayor. This is the 19th year the city has prepared an annual comprehensive financial report to date. All 18 previous annual financial reports were award winners. In our continued pursuit of excellence, the latest annual report will again be submitted to the Certificate for Achievement and Excellence of Financial Reporting with Government Finance Officers Association. City's independent auditing firm, Allen Gibson Hulick, LC, completed the audit of 2022 financial records. Brian Holst, Vice President Assurance of Allen Gibson Hulick, is here tonight to give you a presentation on the 22 audit.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. So included with your agenda today were 3 letters that we issued in connection with the audit. The first one's the governance letter, which is about 5 pages and mostly encompasses the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. Also in there is your financial statement opinion, which is kind of the big piece from us that goes into your report, and then also your government auditing standards report on internal control and compliance. So like I said, we're going to spend most of the time talking about what's in the governance letter. However, with that said, on the next slide, the main thing I wanted to kind of go over first is the financial statement opinion, which is kind of what everybody else wants to know as far as the results of the audit. As far as that goes, it was a unmodified or clean opinion, which doesn't sound super fancy, but that's what you want. So there's nothing sort of negative or anything controversial or anything we need to report today as far as the financial statements go, so always good news. As far as the rest of the stuff in the governance letter, that sort of covers the things that our auditing standards either recommend or require that we go over with you today. The first of those things on page 1 just kind of talks about our overall responsibilities with regards to the audit, a little bit of the plan, scope, and timing, and the letters in which we communicated that to you initially. The next section talks about accounting policies and procedures. And the biggest thing there this year is the adoption of or change in accounting policies. There was a fairly significant change this year, which was GASB statement number 87, which changed the way that you report leases. And essentially, that resulted in, under the new standard, about $1.6 million worth of right-to-use assets and associated lease liabilities, and about $51,000 worth of lease receivables with an associated deferred inflow. Of that, though, about, I think, 1.3 million or so was already sort of recorded on your financial statements in the past under the old rules. So of that 1.6 million, it's somewhat similar to what you've kind of seen in the past. It's just reported in a different spot. With that, though, there's a whole new footnote, which is footnote 11 this year, that kind of explains some of those lease agreements. And then also several changes to some of the other footnotes, like footnote 1, where it talks about your overall policies. There's some new wording in there regarding leases. And then in footnote 4 and 12, which is capital assets and debt, there's sort of new sections there corresponding to the new things related to the lease standard. So got through all of that, did result in a little bit of an adjustment to beginning net position. And again, that's just because of the things that you were already recording under the old lease standards and how those changed. Once we recorded them under the new standards, there was a little bit of difference in cost. So there was an adjustment to beginning net position for that. Any questions on that? I know that was kind of a big change, so before I move on to anything else, just want to make sure there weren't any questions or anything. Okay. The next page in the governance letter kind of talks about our estimates, or the city's estimates, and what we've done to sort of look at those. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on those. It does take up most of the page, though. But mostly it's your pension and other post-employment benefit liabilities, and then also the allowance for uncollectible receivables. The big thing on that page, which is at the bottom and doesn't take up a ton of space, though, is that there weren't any audit adjustments or uncorrected misstatements as the result of our audit, which It's always good news, means finance did a good job of getting everything in there and recorded correctly. So didn't have anything to report there. The next section is where we kind of talk about any issues or disagreements or anything, findings that came up in our audit. So again, I'm happy to report that there weren't any this year. As far as we were concerned, everything went pretty smoothly as far as the audit. Nothing really came up that we felt like needed to be communicated to you today. So again, that's always good news. The next section, kind of before we finish going through that letter, did want to talk a little bit about the government auditing standards report on internal control and compliance, because that's sort of a follow-up to if we have any findings or comments or suggestions, that's the report that we would put them in. So again, that's a clean report this year, no findings, no concerns. And what we kind of wanted to point out here was that, we're looking at the policies and procedures that the city has. We're looking at how they're recording transactions, looking at all of the disclosures sort of as part of that compliance piece of that report. So the fact that, again, we don't have anything to report in it to you today is definitely good news and kind of speaks highly of the quality of your finance department and their ability to kind of put all this together for us to audit. Also in the in the report, not in the letter, is some of the new GASB pronouncements that are coming out over the next few years. Those first two, the public-private, public-public partnership, and the subscription-based IT arrangements are the two that are due next year. And potentially, those could have some impact on your financials. The IT arrangement one is basically leases just for IT software. So it's kind of the same general idea as what you implemented this year for leases. It's just more for that intangible software type stuff. The public-private partnership one is related to things like parking garages, for example, if you had one and you hired somebody to run it for you, or if they paid you up front so that they had the ability to run it. So those types of situations where there's sort of publicly provided services that you're hiring or outsourcing out to other entities. So that one's not quite as common. I suspect almost everybody's going to have the subscription-based IT arrangements. There's some very specific requirements for the public-private partnership stuff. So while it certainly, there's going to be some of those that exist in general, they're probably not going to be nearly as common as the IT stuff. The other things I don't see a huge change, especially in the short term for, but we did list out all the ones that are effective that haven't been implemented yet. The last few pages in our letter just kind of talk about some of the things that I'll say, I don't want to say they're generic and that we give them to everybody because they're important enough that we wanted to put them in the letter, but they're not the result of things that we found as part of your audit. So the first one is cybersecurity risk, which mostly, while it's not new by any means, I think COVID with everybody going more remote has kind of caused it to be more front and center lately. In fact, just the other day I saw that there were some Russian hackers that had some kind of file sharing software that they were taking advantage of that included things like the British Broadcasting Company, the U.S. Department of Energy, Mizzou is where I went, which is why I saw it. They were part of that hack too. So it's just at that point where even if you have good policies and procedures, it's so prevalent now with the ransomware and everything else to just make sure you're staying on top of it. So we always feel like it's important enough to kind of put that reminder in there just to keep it on everybody's mind. And then the next section is the comprehensive policy and procedure review. And going back to kind of talking about our compliance report, really as part of the audit, we're looking at those processes and procedures, but we're not really taking a deep dive into, could this be better or could you do this instead? It's really more just understanding the processes so that we can perform our financial audit. So there's always maybe that ability to kind of look deeper into things. But again, those aren't listed because of issues or concerns that we had as part of the audit. So I do want to make that clear that I'm not saying you need this or that there were issues that we found and so you absolutely have to go get this, just kind of some best practice suggestions. The last page then lists our AGH University website, which has free CPE and webinars that you can go out and kind of watch anytime. The CPE versions of them, you have to watch them live, but you can always go back and watch things later as rebroadcasts. With that said, I think that was all I specifically had to go over today, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I would like to say, though, thank you to Matt and Nancy and the rest of the finance department. We can't do our job without their assistance, and I think things went really smooth, and we definitely appreciate their help.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Council, do you have any questions?
Thorough audit,
Very thorough, yeah.
and it's kind of the same old song. I mean, we get used to it, not having any audit issues or any audit points from our award-winning finance team, but hats off again to you and Nancy and the rest of the staff for another job well done.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and we have speaking of finance, we have two presentations for finance this evening. Matt, do you want to join me up here? Oh, great. All right, our first presentation is presentation of Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. The Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada advances excellence in government finance by providing best practices, professional development, resources, and practical research for more than 22,500 members in the communities they serve. GFOA has awarded the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting in the City of Gardner for its annual comprehensive financial report for the fiscal year ended December 31st, 2021. The Certificate of Achievement is the highest form of recognition in the area of governmental accounting and financial reporting, and its attainment represents a significant accomplishment by the government and its management. This is the 18th consecutive year that the city has received this distinguished award. Congratulations. Yeah, so let's see. We did we got another one too. Don't go anywhere. Okay, and then the next one is presentation of GFOA's Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. GFOA has presented the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award to the City of Gardner, Kansas for its annual budget for the fiscal year beginning January 1st, 2023. In order to receive this award, a government unit must publish a budget document that meets program criteria as a policy document, as a financial plan, as an operations guide, and as a communications device. This is the 9th consecutive year that the city has received this distinguished award. Like Steve said, we almost take it for granted. It happens so frequently. It's great to see.
Seasons change, summer rolls around, they get 2 more awards. It's
Yeah.
just great.
All right, so no public hearings. We do have time for public comments, and I will say, if you'd like to make, oh, I'm sorry, that is kind of important. That is kind of important. I apologize, Matt. Yes, we have revised 2023-2024 budget presentation. Sorry about that, Matt.
Tonight's presentation is on the revised 23-24 budget presentation. We have a biennial budget, and we approved the original 23-24 budget last year, so this is kind of going over the revisions to the budget. The overall presentation can be broken down into the following components. We'll go through the budget process, financial update, revised budget highlights, mill rates, utility rates, and then next steps. We started this year's budget process in March with the year-end financial report. Then in April, we had outside agency requests. In May, we had capital improvement program. Then tonight, we're going over kind of revised 23-24 budget highlights. Then on July 3rd, consideration of the resolution to exceed the revenue neutral rate and setting a public hearing. Depending on that decision, public hearings and the approval process will vary. We ended last year in a strong position with 54% fund balance in the general fund. This year, we've basically collected year-to-date general fund revenues of 46% compared to 42% of the year elapsed. The reason why this is favorable is gas franchise fees were favorable and interest earnings were also favorable. For example, gas franchise fees have already surpassed the annual budgeted amount by 8% by the end of May. Then city staff is constantly looking to invest into short-term U.S. Treasuries to increase interest earnings. We're getting anywhere from 4 to 5% on these short-term Treasuries. General fund is projected to have interest earnings of close to $440,000 by the end of the year. Development fees, like building permit fees, have been a little bit disappointing so far this year. There are a lot of projects in the planning pipeline, but they're not really going as vertical as quickly as we anticipated. This is likely due to the high interest rate environment and labor shortages and supply chain issues. So the high interest rate environment is helping on interest earnings on our cash, but it's also probably hurting the speed of development. Some budget challenges that we face include basically the increasing cost of health insurance. There'll be significant increases spending in the second half of 23, then also in 24 due to large increases in health insurance premiums. The cost of the health insurance will have more than doubled from 2022 to 2024. This will affect the general fund and also utility funds' long-term financial health because these are recurring costs. Property and liability insurance is anticipated to increase about 60% from 2022 to 2024, an increase of about $400,000. And then, like most budget years, staffing needs and adequate staffing is always a cost driver for the budget. New sworn officer positions in the budget include basically moving the 2024 police officer position up to 2023 and converting it to a sergeant. So that's an approximate cost of $20,000. The school resource officer in 2023 was a request from the school district, will be partially funded by the school district. And then a police detective in 2024. Other new positions include a building inspector in 2023, a customer service rep that would be in the community development and public works department in 2023, building maintenance tech in 2023, then engineering tech 2 and public works in 2024, and that position would need a new vehicle. The new position cost represents only estimated salaries. Benefits and payroll taxes vary per position, but represent a significant cost. We received more position requests than that is being presented here tonight. These are the only ones, or these were determined to be the highest priority positions. Other personnel changes include promoting one journeyman electric operator into a lead electric operator, reclassing the utility assistant or admin assistant to utility specialist, reclass all police corporals to police sergeants, and then we have some budget savings from combining the animal control officer and code enforcement officer into one position. Some kind of budget initiatives or changes from the original 2-year budget include a reconstruction of South Center Street Trail. We got a KDOT grant to help fund this project. Our local match of $245,000 is an estimate, and that would come from the Park Improvement Fund, basically park impact fees. The budget includes increased funding for street maintenance programs and also ADA improvements. These programs would be funded out of the Infrastructure Special Sales Tax Fund. The Stormwater Master Plan is in addition to the 2024 budget at a cost of $150,000 in the general fund. And then the new website is planned for 2024, an estimated cost at $55,400. New budget initiatives and changes in the utility funds include moving up construction of electric substation number 4 at a cost of $4.8 million. Construct utilities building would cost about $2.6 million. And then also an electric master plan in 2024 at a cost of $150,000. Valuation increase estimate is 11.1%. You can see the city's valuation from 2021 to 2022. This includes an adjustment for what we know are basically pending tax abatements and exemptions from the tax rules. Please note that there are pending tax appeals that could lower this estimate even lower. There's a couple scenarios for you to consider. Keeping a flat mill rate and capturing the valuation increase would increase property taxes on average single-family home in Gardner by about $5.38 a month. For the purpose of this analysis, we assume the average Gardner home appraisal to be $305,000. The revenue neutral rate would decrease the mill rate by 2.092 mils. A mill is worth approximately $311,000. The revenue neutral rate would limit property taxes to the same dollar amount as the prior year, would also lower allocations of motor vehicle tax and county sales tax in future budgets. So we have several different scenarios for you to consider. One thing that's very important to realize is when we talk about mill rates for the city, we have two tax levy funds. We have the general fund, which funds most of our governmental operations. And then we also have the bond and interest fund, which serves the debt service on our governmental debt. Based on our kind of the council retreat and some conversations that happened at that council retreat, one of the main concerns was making sure we had bond and interest fiscal capacity or debt capacity to be able to fund projects that are expected to come up in the next few years. Right now, under a flat mill levy scenario, we have about $9.25 million in bond and interest fiscal capacity. Well, you see in all these scenarios, we're kind of focused on the bond and interest mill rate. The reason for that is in previous years, we've been actually cutting or reducing mills in the general fund because we had capacity there. If you look at the fund balances in the flat mill levy scenario, general fund will be down to 26% as a planned deficit, as a planned kind of spend down of general fund balance by 2028. So between the two funds, the bond and interest fund is that one that has the capacity. So in the flat mill scenario, you would have $9.25 million in principal amount of a 10-year GO bond. The revenue neutral rate scenario, that would drop down to $2.25 million.
And Matt, that assumes, don't mean to interrupt, but that assumes that interest rates stay stable and that they don't continue to go up, because the higher the interest rates go, the lower the fiscal capacity, correct?
Yes, and this is based on a 4.5% interest rate.
Correct. So,
A half mil reduction scenario would basically leave the bond and interest fiscal capacity at 7.5 million. A 1 mil reduction would basically lower it down to 5.75 million. This kind of summarizes the different scenarios, so you can look at all the different mill rates. An important factor to consider is a mill rate is worth about $311,000. For electric rates, we recently changed the rate and fee structure back in March. We reduced residential rates by 2%. We reduced electric service charge by $4 each month for residential customers. We temporarily eliminated the power cost adjustment. And the goal of these changes was to provide relief to electric customers and reduce the fund balance to a target level of 25%. And that excludes the capital reserve for the electric utility. There isn't much data to go on since we just implemented these changes. So we'll continue to monitor basically cash flow in that utility, but also we've identified the need to update the electric master plan, then following that, updating the electric rate study. For water rates, we have a multi-year plan of basically 3.7% increases each year from 2020 to 2029. This rate plan was developed to basically support the recent expansion of the Hillsdale Water Treatment Plant. In the 5-year forecast, fund balance actually drops down to 15% temporarily before returning back to the target levels. The main reason for this is increased interest costs associated with debt and CIP that wasn't planned originally when we did the rate structure. And then also we have a construction of a new water transmission line estimated about $9.35 million. There are some things that we're looking into to basically give the fund some more breathing room, where we can look at bundling small capital projects together with other projects to debt finance rather than do cash outlays. And also, we see a drop-off in debt service at the end of 2025, where basically we have about $465,000 a year in debt that would be dropping off at that time, which would give breathing room to the fund. In the wastewater utility, we have a multi-year plan of 4.2% increase each year from 2023 to 2031. This rate plan supports the planned expansion of the Kill Creek Water Resource Recovery Facility. In the 5-year forecast, it drops down to about 22% before returning back to target levels. One of the reasons it can basically accommodate the large amount of CIP it has planned for that utility is that we have $3 million in HUD appropriations that we anticipate receiving, and then we're also dedicating our ARPA funds to help pay for part of that conveyance system for the sewer utility. So the next steps is we're seeking direction from the City Council on budget initiatives. What mill rate you would like to see in the resolution for July 3rd. And at July 3rd, you consider the resolution to exceed the revenue neutral rate and setting a public hearing. And then based on that decision, we could have public hearings in either August or September.
All right, thank you, Matt. Council has some questions, comments? Yeah. Mark, why don't you start us
I'll
off?
defer you, Mark.
Okay.
Might take all mine.
Can you calculate right now, at some point, what the mill reduction would be to keep the increase to $0? In other words, we might capture some of the valuation increase, but not all. So I don't know what number you use for however many single-family homes we have, so I couldn't myself. But I'd be curious what that number is.
I'm not sure I understood exactly what you said. So what, are you trying to keep a flat mill or same property taxes as what we did last year?
So you said we were gonna go up $538 per single-family home, right?
Yes.
And that's if we don't change the
okay.
rate, right? So if we change the rate, not based off of mill rate, but to keep the 538 to 0,
Gotcha.
what is the mill rate, right? So working backwards. So just sometime that calculation. And then for the bond and interest, what do we already have allocated based off CIP that we need, right? So is the 2.5 million definitely too low? It's out if we want to approve our current CIP plan?
This is your reserve capacity. There's nothing
Only
allocated to it right now.
Okay, perfect, thank you. On the SRO, you said partial funding from the school district. What's partial mean? Because I'm hoping it's 100%, because the school district needs that resource officer.
So we looked into that. Pam did some research on that before we presented this, and the average is around $29 an hour for the jurisdictions in Johnson County. Our rate is
34. It's going to be, I believe, 34.
so the only school district that factors in benefits is Olathe, and they split with their school district 50-50 on the total cost of the officer. So we would be an outlier if we changed that.
I'm not opposed to being an outlier.
So the school district is paying their salary, but we are paying for their benefits and all that stuff?
Yes, so we took the average salary of the officers that are going in. That's where we got the number from, but that did not include benefits.
Okay, I might revisit that. And then the need for the website, what issues do we have? I know Danika's wanted to update it, but what's driving it?
The city introduced its current website 7 years ago. Generally, industry standards saying you should update it at least every 5 years. A new website allows us to add new features such as public engagement tools. more engaging designs to create a better first impression and create a more user-friendly experience for both the front and back end users. A new website would also remove outdated features and technology.
Like Flash.
Yes, so I get that part. What things are we thinking in the additional features that we would add?
We'd have to dig into that. We basically gave a range of options, and the $50,000 was the higher, expense, or that was basically most of the options, and we haven't determined if that's what we really need yet. We were going to try and pare it down from there.
Okay, that's what I have for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Let's go to Mark.
I don't have anything.
What would you feel comfortable of having our bond and interest fiscal capacity at?
That's really a policy decision. It depends on, you've mentioned projects in the past, like another interchange at like Moonlight. You've mentioned the frontage road on the other side of the interstate. There's no funding sources for those projects right now. Special highway and our other street funds are pretty much tied up with our current CIP. That's mostly reconstruction projects and some upgrades.
So one large project like that and then 2.25 is.
Keep in mind, we would only be focusing on trying to get grants, and then we would do the local match. Like the local match for the current interchange project, I think Gardner Road Bridge is $4 to $5 million. There's no way we could fund probably one of those projects by ourselves.
So I think that what you were looking for, if you're saying a zero increase for property taxes, that is the revenue neutral rate.
There's a slight
That's
difference.
16.
Not exactly. It'll be close.
Yeah. It basically, it effectively is the revenue neutral rate because there's not really a difference. I mean, you could say, okay, well, yeah, I mean, from the standpoint of mills, the mills are based on valuations. Valuations increase. In order to be able to make a revenue neutral, you have to decrease the mills commensurate with the valuation increase. It's zero.
One small comment, I believe what Mark Baldwin was driving at is there would be a small increment due to new growth. So
Very.
essentially, if we have the revenue neutral rate, which limits the exact dollar amount that we received to the prior year, if we had any new growth, that would
Oh, yeah.
drive down everything
Yeah,
else.
essentially, we never capture growth with R&R.
But we can't, yeah, because new growth is not exempted, which is, well, don't get me started. That's something for the Kansas legislature to try to fix at some point.
I knew you'd understand.
But I think that it's understand we've got more than doubling of our health insurance costs. We've got doubling of our, oh, come on, Steve, I know the rest of it here. So we have more than doubling of the health insurance costs, so doubling of the, what was the other one that you said? Was
The property and liability went up
the
60%.
liability insurance costs have doubled.
And the reasoning behind that one was NPR was dropping us from our, basically our coverage of our electric assets.
Yeah,
And the valuation on our current assets went up enough that even when they took that component out, our premium still went up slightly. And then the electric components alone are considered to be probably 300, 400,000.
yeah.
And that's if we're worried about trying to get people to actually give it, or basically take on those assets.
So current costs are basically swamping our ability to fund new projects. That's basically what it comes down to. I don't know if I, in good conscience, say, okay, well, we're just going to keep revenue neutral and drop the mill levy to 16.7. I don't think that's possible here.
Yeah, I'm concerned that you're gonna drop it and then have to,
Raise it again.
and you'll see this rubber band effect where you're dropping it and raising it back up. Especially if we saw another health insurance bill or something similar to that. I mean, we're talking double, but it was what, $2 or $3 million?
It went up from basically 1.7 to, I think about 3.8 actually.
3.8 is
Yeah,
more than
so,
double.
I
Yeah.
mean, at the revenue neutral rate, we would have eaten that entire 2.5, right?
No,
No.
you couldn't use that for that.
No,
Different fund. The general were good.
we're talking about bond and interest. Bond and interest
Number-wise,
is where,
You see what I'm saying?
yeah, but our bond and interest fund is tied to our general fund capacity, so it's really 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
You have the ability to move mills back and forth between
We
the two
could.
funds.
But then that might hurt our credit rating too. Might it?
It's more about making sure, like, you understand, like, the difference, like, if you shift mills from bond and interest to general fund, understanding how you're hurting your ability to fund projects.
Exactly.
I tend to agree with Steve on this. I think we have a lot of projects that we need to do and be able to try to fund and be able to get funding, et cetera. I think we would go too dangerously low if we didn't keep the flat rate.
We drop a mill. We've done that the last 2 years. We've dropped a mill. And we've been able to get away with it because we've been in a very high growth environment. Now we're getting in a position where growth is slowing down. We're already seeing that being reflected in the building permits. I got a concern that we might overcorrect here, you know, and so I just made my point, I think. I know you think differently on this
No,
one,
no,
Mark, so.
I like the opinion. What I would suggest then is, if that was the thinking, is that we're worried about overcorrecting, is, remember the budget is, I know it's biannual, but you know, we're looking out, when we look at bond and interest and when we look at, you know, the fund balance, we're looking at 5 years. So if we, in whatever scenario, there's several scenarios there, if you did something for 1 year, right, then what does that do to the outside years? I understand the in number, but what if then you have to adjust it back the next year to compensate the rubber band effect, right? Because I get that. You don't want to go down by 20 cents so that you have to go up by 60 cents the next year. Sure. But I think everybody appreciates if you go down 20 cents, if I have to go back 20 cents. That's a year I didn't have to pay 20 cents. So if we're going to deal with that, looking at it from a capacity issue, maybe we look at, if you did drop in those different scenarios for a single year, what do the next few years look at? Not just the 5 year, right? And I know you have to look at it from that perspective, particularly for the credit rating. But if it's for 1 year and then growth does show up again, or we continue it, then it's a non-issue, and we delayed it a year, right? We've been lucky to do that. Not saying we can ride that gravy train forever,
No.
right? I'm not, oblivious to the fact that we do have to deal with it at some point, but maybe it's not this year, is all.
Could you bring up that schedule on the different scenarios? The one with all the scenarios on it. I think it's the last slide, right there. Okay. So right now, our mill levy is 18.69. 2 years ago was, I think, almost 21. Okay. We've reduced it by a mill the last 2 years. It's now, if we do that this time around, it would be 17.69. That provides us $4 million in bond and interest after 5 years. We do capture some valuation increase. It's not totally revenue neutral, but it's what we've done the last 2 years.
It's an option.
I mean, I'm a little leery about that because I also know that our costs are increasing and we've had unanticipated additional costs in the last year.
I'll say this, from what we talked about at our
The retreat,
it
yeah.
seems low. I mean, from a standpoint of all the stuff that we're talking about that we want to do, that's just my initial gut.
And at the retreat, I don't think we knew about the insurance yet, did we?
We did.
No.
Or we had.
We knew
we
about
had
the
a-
health
A
insurance.
preview that it was
Yeah.
coming,
Increase,
yeah. We didn't know the rates or what it was gonna be.
Well, we had an idea of the health insurance. I did not know about the liability. That was not.
That's new.
Property liability was different. That was a bit of an extra gun punch.
I just, nothing is getting cheaper, and I don't like raising rates, but I want to put our city in a position, I want the city to be in a position where we have capacity and, we're in a growth mode right now. We can use that capacity as needed, and I don't want to put the city in a bad position.
I think we need to work up, I think we can't go revenue neutral. I don't think that's even a possibility at this point because of the additional costs that were occurring and the slowing of growth. But I could see us working up a $0.5 mil reduction and $1 mil reduction scenario, look at those back to back and see what those would look like in those outlying years.
Right now, it's kind of focused on the bond and interest, so you can see what it does if you're doing bond and interest. If you're talking about general fund, I mean, that just means expenditure cuts, basically.
Yeah.
Because right now, the fund balances are where they need to be, so if you're cutting mills there, you just need to
Yeah.
cut expenditures.
Yeah, I see that the general fund balances aren't really changing at all. I think it's just affecting B and I. So-
We did that because in the 5-year outlook, we got 4% below what our target is.
Yep.
So that's why we didn't give those scenarios, because they'll get that to the low 20s.
Okay. So let's talk general fund. Okay. Is the only scenario that keeps us at 26% without any kind of mills exchanging between BNI and general fund? Is the flat mill levy the only one that keeps us there?
Just to clarify.
R&R is 26%.
Yeah, we didn't adjust the general fund here, because if we're rolling back mills, we weren't planning to roll back mills in the general fund unless directed to. We were gonna roll them back in the
Only
bond and
the
interest.
Only in bond and interest.
That's the only
Yeah.
number that's being listed.
So that's what I was thinking.
You can roll back mills in the general fund, but we just need to have cuts to go with it.
Exactly. Which I don't think we can.
Right, so I
Withstand.
didn't present anything of cutting any current project, right? It would just limit our potential for a new project that comes down the road.
And already we're underfunded for projects. And we've got, you know the need.
I mean, I guess that's what my point is.
Literally
We wanna
tens of
limit
millions of
ourselves,
dollars.
as projects come up. I mean,
Well, depends on how you look at limit, right? If we look at it for a year, right, this is a longer term forecast. And things can change in a year, as we know. So it would be interesting to know where we are in a year than if you had bounced right back to where you were. If we cut them in and we go right back next year to 18.669 with a projected growth of the valuation as well, where would we be as far as B&I? That would be very interesting to me, at least.
So raising mills is a lot harder than lowering mills.
I don't know, up or down, plus or minus, pretty easy.
One thing that might
Oh.
help is the assumption for property tax collection growth is 5%. So that's lower than what we've received, like this year was 11%. So that factors into like what the out years will look like.
I mean, because that's the thing. If you're sitting out there where you're getting your bill, any of us, right? Once R&R got introduced, we've never been R&R. Valuations have been through the roof in Johnson County for 20 years.
Yep.
Definitely in the last 5, everybody's going, hey, my property taxes went through the roof. It was exponential growth. And here we are saying, yeah, no, it's great to just keep capturing the valuation, but we're essentially still adding to everybody's bill.
We're not doing that though.
You-
We're lowering mills. We're not capturing the entire valuation increase.
But if you don't go
But their bill
down,
still goes
their
up.
bill goes
Yes,
up.
of course their bill goes up. My bill goes up. I'm a
My
resident
point,
of
and I'm
Gardner
not
too.
saying it can stay zero because obviously the city's expenses go up just like all of our expenses at our home, right? So I understand we've had some that were very large. Hopefully, some of those get rectified, or we get somebody to help us out on insurance, or all sorts of things could change, right? They could get tripled next year. They could be cut in half next year. I doubt it, but
I
you never
doubt it.
know. So if we look at it in a short term, it'd be interesting to know what kind of effect the short-term change would have on the long-term picture. Because if we went down, I'm just picking a number, a mill for 2024, then in 2025, if we raised it back a mill to the 18.869, 869, right? Where would that put us? Obviously not the same amount as we would have been if we left it there today, right? She lost a year. But how much did it affect us? A mil? A million, sorry.
That's why I'm asking about getting the workup
Yeah.
for the
That-
half
that's
mill
what I think
and the
would be
full
useful to
mill.
see.
Yeah.
I can tell you, reducing it by 1 mil, then bumping it back up 1 mil the next year won't have much of an impact. You're basically taking $311,000 out of the fund balance. The issue is if you're doing that and if you plan to keep doing that, that's not an easy story to tell to rating agencies.
Right.
Is that right?
I know, we may not be able to do that continuously. You have to have some significant growth to offset it. I get that. I'm just saying, is this the year that we have to say, hey, we're gonna not do anything as far as a reduction?
We do have a lot of projects in the works that you say aren't affected by this right now. And my concern is, and this is one of the things I hear again and again, is it's not just the city, right? It's the school, it's the county, it's everybody.
The
They
state.
each come at you for $5 here and $5 there, and then you're all of a sudden paying $100 more a month. And so whatever we can do, I don't necessarily think revenue neutral is, in the cards, but what kind of reduction can we see? And if that means that we have to cut something or not fund a project for a little bit longer, but we're not pricing citizens out of living here. Because what good are all the projects if they can't live here anymore?
Right, I mean, I agree. R&R, I think, was a great idea, theoretically from the legislature, but nobody's ever gonna be R&R because
Nope.
inflation, right? So it would be awesome to see an R&R with a inflation adjustment, and that's where you start from, not actual R&R. And then in our case, you have these specific issues that we encountered with insurance this year that would say, okay, well, you started at your R&R plus inflation, here you went up this amount, that's our new base. I get that you may have to pause on a project for a year, half a year. But it also means everybody gets to keep that money for that same amount of time.
We're also having to move up projects, Mark, because of the fact that the needs are exceeding the anticipated start date.
I get that, but the problem is you could say that about every single thing
Well-
for every single person in every single aspect.
And the-
Parks, roads, insurance, their own car, it doesn't matter, everybody can see that.
You also have to consider that there are projects on the horizon that we may need to fund and assist with that open doors for additional things to come, for additional funds to come in the city, that we can't talk about right now, but they're. That would not want to wait a year. We would, yeah, absolutely.
I understand that too. I really do, and maybe we have a conversation about that offline. But my point is, without knowing those specific details, that projects come and go, and that can happen every year. Maybe it's a big one, maybe it's not. But it's tough to sit on the other side of this and say, you know what, we're gonna absorb that growth. We're gonna keep growing because we have all these needs, and we're gonna help provide so that all these great things come in, and then you never capture it because you're always funding the next thing, right? And that's great. It's nice to always have nice things, but I mean, it's like a giant Ponzi scheme. You gotta pay the piper eventually, right? So unless we just keep raising taxes forever and ever, which, I mean, I already said, we're probably not R&R, so we're gonna raise them. But do you have to go basically leave the mill where it is today?
No,
For another year?
I don't think
know.
anybody at this dais is saying we're gonna leave the mill where it is.
Okay, but if you're not, then somebody has to draw a line in the sand, and obviously we're probably gonna pick different lines in the sand, is my point.
Well, what I'm saying is that we can start with the half mill and have them do that workup and see where it's where it puts us. I don't think that R&R is realistic. I don't think that keeping the mill where it is also realistic because you're right, it does impact us. I will say this, the amount of tax that comes from the city is minuscule compared to the school district and the county.
Absolutely.
All right, they're the ones that are taking the lion's share of the tax bill, and
Absolutely.
they're not lowering their
And
mills.
you have to consider that those entities sometimes look at the aggregate, and if we lower a mill, then that impacts their decision on what they're gonna do with their mill.
Yep.
Because I know for a fact that there are other entities that are planning on raising additional funds through the mill. And it may not be to the same degree if we hold the line. And I'll tell you, 10 million in funding capacity is not very much when you
It's
look at the
low.
projects that are in the pipeline. It's really not. I mean, you're if you have any idea that you want to do an interchange, I mean, that's gonna be at
That's 10 million
least
right there.
6 to 10 million.
Yep.
You know, we're looking at redesigning the off-ramp to open up land over on the interstate.
And to fix the the safety hazard there
That's
too.
6 million
Yeah.
to do that, so.
Do you need the mill reduction or what we're going to do, or just need to know that we need to have a public hearing on July 3rd, because we are not gonna stay revenue neutral?
On July 3rd, it's basically approving a resolution that states what you're planning to do with the mill rate. So we can put in a placeholder for now, and you can adjust it at that meeting. But the public hearing, I mean, that's basically, you're going to give notice to people for the public hearing, and then they'll have a public hearing in like late August, early September.
So that for time's sake, we are going to exceed the revenue neutral rate. Maybe
We just
you could
don't know how
present-
much.
You could present a half or a mil or zero at a later time, or do you need a specific number tonight?
It would be helpful. I mean, you're not going to be held to it, but if you give me like, what should the basically assumption be for that resolution, and then you can change it if you want to at that meeting.
I think half.
I was gonna go with a half.
Why don't we say half, put it as a placeholder? Is that fair enough? Okay.
Yeah.
Gotta start somewhere.
A full mill is a little bit dicey, I think. I mean, I'd rather be able to do a full mill, but I don't think we can right now, not with the growth slowing down.
So at the next meeting, I'll bring back options. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Can't believe I almost skipped that, I'm sorry. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so no public hearings and public comments. If you are here to talk about Fairfield or the Hibachi restaurant, we'll have time right before that agenda item that you can talk. If you have other comments, though, you'd like to have right now, at this time, members of the public are welcome to make comments about city matters or items on the agenda that are not part of a public hearing. If you wish to come forward, please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. There is a 5-minute time clock on your left. No profanity, no personal attacks. With that being said, come forward, state your name and address for the record, and the podium is now open. All right. No one coming forward. We'll move to consent agenda. Is there an item on the consent agenda council would like to remove? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion Shoot, second Deaton. We approve the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Abstain? Consent agenda passes. No planning and zoning consent agenda. Committee recommendation. Committee recommendation number 1. Consider authorizing the execution of a progressive design build phase 1 professional services contract with Lloyd Builders Incorporated for the Gardner Utilities building. Guys, this is
Mayor, Council. Jeff Lemire, the utility manager, will give the presentation. But I just wanted to make a quick comment about this project. In 2018, the city purchased a mobile office building to accommodate line maintenance staff that went from 6 to 10 employees. One of the recommendations that came from the UAC, and maybe Mark may remember, was to find a permanent location for line maintenance. And that's the CIP that was approved a couple of years ago. So that brings us to tonight's agenda item. Thank you.
Mayor, council members. As Gon said, in 2017, we actually started with an RFP for a new line maintenance trailer. Actually, it was a used trailer that was purchased for them. Then in 2020, we went with a preliminary design with GBA to give us an estimate on costing out this project. And now we're here to present design build phase 1 professional services contract with Lloyd Builders Inc. for the Gardner's utility building. Through this process, there's been multiple times where the electric electric distribution property has been questioned to see if purchasing that could happen from the city as well. So as part of this design process, what we have done is we've kind of put in there a line maintenance phase and then an electric phase so that we design everything on this site all at one time. It helps save money in the entire design process through determining the space required for future growth, the structural components, the utility design, parking requirements, drainage requirements. All of those requirements then can be taken in consideration and built at one time versus having to do design of a portion of it and then design of another portion later. We've already seen some cost savings in the proposal from Lloyd Builders for that. So we're here tonight to ask you to authorize the city administrator to execute a contract with Lloyd Builders, Inc. for a progressive design build phase 1 professional service contract for the Gardner's Utilities Building Project in the amount of $180,500. With this, it would also allow the electric distribution personnel to move over, and then it would allow options for the city to use that facility for something else or to continue to use it and then just slowly move over people as time comes on. So if you guys have any questions, we also have a representative from Lloyd Builders here in the audience as well.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Any public comment for council committee recommendation number 1? Okay. Council, questions?
Yeah. So my only concern is it looks like we're taking up quite a bit of space in the middle, and I'm concerned about the future growth. I understand phase 1 and phase 2, but are we limiting ourselves with this particular design? I don't know what the difficulties are with this design. If we need a phase 3 or 4 in the future, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of space there around the building, all the way around, particularly the northeast corner. Are we concerned that we're gonna have a problem? We're gonna come back here in 5-10 years and say, hey, now we're hamstrung, we can't put more here with this design?
That is one thing that we're looking at. We have to provide a whole list of all the equipment we currently have and kind of what our projection is. And then Lloyd Builders and Finkel Architects will be looking at that through the design process. And with this being a design build process, we can look at that through the design phase, and then we can determine where we want to go with that number. You know, we've already kind of had those discussions. Do we make those longer bays to accommodate more than one truck in a line for future growth? One thing that, you know, this site is laid out for a reason is that we have pull in, pull out. We don't want any of these big trucks backing in and out like they currently are at the electric generation. And then at the Public Works yard where they currently are, we have traffic jams getting out every morning, people backing into each other. I mean, we're trying to eliminate those conflicts.
No, that's great.
And another option is, you know, do we build it as a 2-story building so that we have more staff option or more storage for parts and components in the future as well?
Okay, that's great, and I think starting something is good. I've been obviously talking about it for over 5 years, but yeah, definitely keep that in mind from my perspective, that I don't want this to be something that, you know, 10 years from now we're saying, man, we really screwed up.
Right, and the northeast portion of the property that the city owns is actually detailed out in the electric master plan as substation expansion. So that part we want to make sure that we stay out of.
You're keeping a generation on the north side, okay.
Anything else, Mark?
Nope.
A motion for committee recommendation number 1?
So moved. Second.
Motion Deaton, second Baldwin. that we authorize the city administrator to execute a contract with Lloyd Builders, Inc. for a progressive design build phase 1 professional services contract for the Gardner Utilities building project in the amount of $180,500. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, abstained. Committee recommendation number 1 passes. Committee recommendation number 2, consider adopting an ordinance approving a rezoning from R1 single family to RP2 two-family and RP4 mixed-density neighborhood for potential residential development at 183rd and Poplar.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. This is an item that has been before you previously. I'm going to do a brief presentation, I believe, if it'll come up. Why don't we bring those slides up for this? Are they here? Great. Thank you, Sharon. Just very quickly, I'm going to give you a quick recap. I'm not going to read everything on these slides. As you know, this process began before the Planning Commission on March 27th. It did come before the City Council. You redirected it back to the Planning Commission to look at and investigate traffic alternatives or planning alternatives that would address some of the traffic issues that were raised previously. The Planning Commission did look at that, and then on May 22nd at the Planning Commission meeting, they made a recommendation on a revised plan that I'm going to attempt to go through with you here in just a second. Just as a reorientation, this property is located on the south side of 183rd Cherokee, just adjacent to the city limits with Edgerton. It is 42 acres. Essentially, this development project would include the extension of Poplar from the north into this property. The property is currently zoned R1 single family. The future land use is identified as medium density residential in a sub-area plan that's adopted as part of the comprehensive plan. You can see the density that is associated with that land use identification. Adjacent land uses include the warehouse and distribution activity that's going on in the city of Edgerton, again adjacent to this property, as well as the residential area to the north and to the east of the property, and agricultural to the south and to the east of the property as well. Adjacent zoning, you can see there, is primarily residential, except on the Edgerton side of the city limits where it is LP, which is one of their industrial park zoning districts. This is a little bit hard to see with the graphic because it doesn't pop up real quick, but a couple things that I want to note with the revised preliminary plan and development plan. Both of these have a couple physical changes to them. There is no longer a physical connection to the east utilizing any of the roadways. Before it was 184th Terrace that was extended and connected to Poplar, and there's been a reconfiguration of the retention facility there to the south, so it was pushed a little further south and reconfigured slightly. As part of the development though, the changes that you'll see here, this is still a two-phase project as proposed. In phase 1 is where you see the primary changes. What I've done here in red is identified what we are now dealing with in the revision of this. As far as road connections, Poplar would be the only road connection at this point in time, serving phase 1, with the idea that it would be extended into phase 2 in the future. The total number of housing units being proposed in phase 1 was reduced to 88 units from 121. That means that the single family units were reduced from 27 to 19, and the multifamily units were reduced from 94 to 69 in the phase 1 part of this project. The acreage for phase 1 has not changed, so you see the 8.2 acres and the 9.4 acres there have not been changed. The phase 2 portion of the project, which is in purple on this particular graphic, would not be developed until there was further connection of either Poplar or some other roadway to the south to potentially 188th Street or to the east towards Gardner Road. So phase 2 under the preliminary development plan would be left blank at this point in time as far as actual development of that phase. So there is not a specific development plan for that area. As you know, there were a number of issues in the previous conversations, including some of the things having to do with potential wetlands and drainage areas and things like that that would still have to be figured out for part of that. So the R1 zoning that's there today would remain for approximately 24.4 acres of this parcel of property. What I will note is the RP2 and the RP4 that you see extending into the Phase 2 area, that would be part of the rezoning. It would then require a preliminary development plan as part of Phase 2. But because of the nature of this project and the way it was presented, it's easier to keep the zoning requests similar to this that you had before, but then the specifics would be worked out as Phase 2, again, being dependent on future road connections. What this essentially does is drives all the traffic in Phase 1 to 183rd Cherokee. So it would all go to the north there. The fire department was brought in as part of the discussion and consultation with this to see that they were okay generally. When we have this kind of length of roadway with one service area, that can raise issues for the fire department. From the standpoint of the fire department, they were comfortable with the reduced number of housing units with this distance, and also understanding that potentially at the ends of these, at one of the cul-de-sacs, if they had an emergency scenario, you might see them jump the curb and come over that way. So they were comfortable with this under this type of scenario for this phase. So they had input on this process as well. The Planning Commission had before it, and I just have this slide in here to reorient you, because this was a ping pong activity, because it went back to Planning Commission. I wanted to let you know that the Planning Commission had the option to either resubmit its original recommendation to you or submit a new and amended recommendation. They have submitted a recommendation, an amended recommendation, and the original recommendation for denial was changed to an approval under this scenario. So their recommendation is for approval of this as presented for the revised scenario. I also just wanted to point out that if they would have not acted on this, that would have been cause to have resubmittal of the same action that they had before. So what you have before you tonight is a recommendation from the Planning Commission for approval of the revised plan as shown. I'm glad to answer any questions that you have at this time. You can see the suggested motion in front of you for tonight. We can talk about the voting procedure on this if there are questions about that.
All right, thank you, Dave. I will open this up to public comment. If you would like to come up and speak, again, please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less, and state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Curtis Holland. I'm the attorney for the developer. Just very briefly, here tonight with Doug Bohai with the ownership group, Greg Watson with McClure, our civil engineer, and Janelle Clayton, our traffic engineer who produced the traffic information report to you all. I want to thank the staff for their help. It took a lot of us sitting around a table in here to figure this thing out. It was an issue we were trying to address specifically for the residents immediately to our east. Remember, they were concerned about the amount of traffic that might come through their neighborhood. There was some suggestions to look at alternatives, and we did do that. We went through all the different scenarios and ended up coming up with, I think, the best scenario, which is to eliminate all access to that area to the east. So we'll have none of our traffic, except for a couple of the single-family houses, that will go into that direction because they're on the end of those cul-de-sacs. But all of the townhomes and other traffic that they were concerned about, none of it will interface with the neighborhood to the east. So we solved that problem, and I hopefully, I'm not sure everybody will be happy, but we are in compliance with the comp plan for the area, and density is good. We were talking about growth and taxes earlier. This will be good for the city. So we're happy and hopefully you all support our project. We're in agreement with the stipulations and so forth. We understand fully we can't go further south until we figure out a way to go east and south or back, away from that neighborhood, at least an alternate direction in and out on that. So with that, we really don't have much to say other than appreciate staff for everything they've done, and really the Planning Commission did a good job relooking at it, and so here to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Council, questions?
I have comments. I can go last.
I attended the last planning commission meeting, just to get better insight, exact what we were, to be prepared for this meeting. And I agree with Casey. I like that we work together. I think this should address a lot of the traffic concerns in the neighborhood east of the new development. I think it was a good example of working together.
My only concern was about emergency services. It sounds like they're okay with this proposal. That was my biggest issue, is that there's one way in and out. Obviously, we want that second phase to develop, so we've got to come up with some sort of a solution on the southern or eastern access. But the fact that it is within traffic parameters and we're not going to be affecting Fairfield in any serious way is definitely a plus on this. And I do commend the planning staff as well as the planning commission for diligently working through this and coming up with a compromise proposal that, I mean, not everybody's ever happy, but I think that this is about as happy as we'll get people on this.
Yeah, no, agreed. Go ahead, Mark.
So, I can't recall ever in this town where we had a 601, one being them state, planning commission to know and staff say this is a good idea, and then it comes to us and we throw out some ideas. And that's great, and we had a room full of people that were upset. We're getting emails, and then it comes back to us with a 5-2 pass from planning commission. I haven't gotten any emails about this since then. And to me, this is awesome. This is everything in the process worked the way it's supposed to, right? People didn't like something, they brought it up, it got addressed. The developers worked with the city to basically amend their plan to still make their money, but in a way that the people were happy with. I mean, I don't know, this is a perfect project in my opinion. Maybe not the way it all looks. Okay?
It's the perfect resolution.
I can always pick out little things, but
It's a perfect
the
resolution,
process
but-
worked
Yeah.
flawlessly.
I agree.
And I really I want to commend the developer for being willing to come back to the table and work on it. The staff for coming up with ways to make this work. Planning commission obviously had to change their tune, right? So that means they saw that the new plan was a good one. To me, it's just great.
And the
I'm just
citizens,
really
they
excited
came out and they showed what they knew was wrong with the project, and it gave the developers an opportunity to fix the issues. And so, yeah, you're right, it did work out the way it should have.
I agree.
really like it.
I mean, the process works.
And I really like how the developer's filling in a gap, a very small, narrow corridor over there to finish off our western border there. I mean, we weren't going to get too many other things to go in that little slit.
No.
So this fills that niche and opens up the door to the south. So I think this is a great plan.
And honestly, if we would have planned that development knowing that there was warehouses there, we would have had the buffer of those townhomes there.
I know.
I mean, that's part of our planning commission, the guidelines, that's what we would have done. So I'm glad it worked out to minimize the traffic for everyone.
Excellent. So we have a motion for committee recommendation number 2.
So moved.
Second.
Motion Shute, second Deaton, that we accept the May 22nd, 2023 recommendation of the Planning Commission regarding applications Z-22-09 and PDP-22-09, rezoning and the associated revised preliminary development plan, and PP-22-06 revised preliminary plat for Fairfield Townhomes, including the proposed phasing and zoning approach, and adopt ordinance number 2764, an ordinance changing the zoning classification or districts of certain lands located in the city of Gardner, Kansas, under the authority granted by Title 17 of the Municipal Code of the city of Gardner, Kansas. City Clerk.
Councilmember Shute,
Yes.
Councilmember Baldwin,
Yes.
Councilmember Ween,
Yes.
Councilmember Deaton,
Yes.
Councilmember Roberts,
Yes.
Mayor Winters,
Yes. Committee recommendation number 2 passes. Thank you, everyone. Okay, moving to committee recommendation number 3. Consider approving a conditional use permit for Arcia, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Arcia?
Arcia? Dave?
Arisa?
Arsa.
Arsa.
Arsa, okay, I apologize. Arsa Hibachi, at 312 West Main Street.
Mayor, members, council, Dave Nopik, Community Development Director again. On this item, this is another one of those interesting cases that didn't just go through Planning Commission. It went to Planning Commission 2 times. Initially, it was heard by the Planning Commission on March 27th at their initial meeting. There were concerns about a number of issues that were raised both by the public as well as the staff, number of conditions. In your staff memo introducing this item, you can see the list of conditions that was originally proposed. They were at 16. That's a large number of conditions that have to be met in order to achieve approval, but staff was originally recommending approval at that point. The Planning Commission, after considering this item in the public hearing and hearing the public comment, made a motion to basically have the applicant come back to staff, try to add details to what they were trying to do to the site, and also get a better understanding of how some of those issues could be addressed in a more formal way in the sense of improvements to the property and things like that. They also had heard from the public and wanted some of those public comments initiated there. I should note on the March 27th meeting, the applicant was not there, or the owner of the actual food truck was not there, and that was another consideration of the Planning Commission. They wanted that individual at their meeting with them. So there was time granted for the applicant to come forward and to take those things into consideration. They did meet with us, and eventually we brought this back to the Planning Commission on May 22nd for reconsideration. So I'll give you a little bit of the behind the scenes on this process. It's a little bit different and a little bit unique from that standpoint. Again, the subject properties at 312 West Main Street. It's outlined in red in this particular graphic here. It's approximately 0.38 acres in size. It is Zone C1. It was a site of a former restaurant here back in the day. We'll just call it that. So it had a commercial use, and this was a vestige of it. The use went away, but the zoning remained. As you know, once you make these zoning decisions, those property rights stick with the land, not necessarily with the business. So that's what makes this a critical piece of this element. The comprehensive plan shows this as a community mixed use area, which would incorporate some of the commercial activity to this. But I want to point out, and I want people to understand, that C1 zoning, no matter what you do tonight, is still going to be remaining on this particular parcel. And there are other commercial uses that this parcel could potentially be used for under that C1 zoning. So I just want to make sure that people understand this. This is really just about the conditional use permit for this particular use, okay? And when I say use, not particular business, the mobile food vendor use, okay? The site plan that was presented to the Planning Commission, you can see this is roughly outlined as a circulation pattern to it. There are 2 access points currently on the Main Street. It was a one-way circulation plan with parking on the outer side of that and handicap parking in the middle, along with picnic area or seating area for people coming to the food truck, as well as other elements here, including a storage shed and also restroom facilities. You can see the dumpster and used oil containers up what would be the northeast corner of the site. We just wanted to bring this aerial a little bit closer to you, and actually this is the up-to-date aerial from Ames, and again the site is in red. You can see the adjacent uses are residential in nature on 2 of the sides. I will note that the vacant parcel to the west of this site is zoned commercial as well. Okay, just so you're aware of that. That also has a commercial zoning to it as well. But you can kind of see the site here with the buildings and structures that are in place. This just zooms it up. I want it closer, as there may be questions later, and we can bring these aerials back up to you at that point in time. But this gives you a good overview of the most current aerial that we have for this area. Couple things to keep in mind here. The public adjacent property owners were present at the Planning Commission hearings. They were not in favor of this particular use. The Planning Commission took that into consideration. The staff also changed its recommendation from an approval with 16 conditions to a recommendation of denial. The reason we did that at that time is when we did our initial recommendation, we did not have the public input from that initial public hearing that occurred in March. That allowed us, as we heard that comment, to look at these things a little bit closer, to talk to the business owner and their representative as part of the process, and we were not feeling comfortable that those 16 conditions would be met under an approval scenario. We felt it was going to just be very difficult to do those things and make it work. So that's why staff changed its recommendation to denial for the May meeting before the Planning Commission. So if you have questions on that, I'd be glad to try to respond to those for you tonight as well. In the suggested motion, and this can be somewhat confusing for the public, so just understand the Planning Commission's recommendation is for denial. If you make this motion and pass it, it requires a 2/3 vote because you're going against the recommendation of the Planning Commission, because this motion is written as you're approving the actual item and the ordinance. So just be aware of that. In your particular case, it's 6 voting members, so simple majority and 2/3 is actually the same. It's 4 votes either way, but I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. I think at this point I'm going to stop. Ryan may have comments as we get into the voting side of this to make sure we're all clear, because there are some nuances to this that may occur if we have a 3-3 or we have some other splits, and I want to make sure we got the right legal interpretation of how that gets interpreted in the motions. So,
This is a governing body.
yes, this is a governing body item.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Thank
so,
you. I will open up to public comment. I do have an emailed public comment I will read into record, and then we will open it up to audience. And this is from Steve Knobloch, 15500 Lake Road 8, Gardner, Kansas. Council members, thank you for taking the time to read this email regarding the conditional use permit for Arsa Hibachi at 312 West Main Street. It is my hope that after reading these details, you will have a better understanding of the property owners and the business owners' perspectives regarding this matter, so a reasonable decision may be made that fairly represents the interest of all parties involved. First, I want to clearly state that I am not the property owner. The property is owned by my father-in-law, Henry Herb Klemp. Herb is advancing in age, and recent health conditions have prevented him from being as involved in this process as he would like. Because of this, my wife and I are assisting with the management of the property, and we are in the process of purchasing it. The results from the initial conditional use permit hearing for Arsa Hibachi identified 16 items that needed to be addressed. These items were clearly defined in the documentation prepared and submitted by the City Planning Commission. Based upon the wording in the documentation, we and Arsa Hibachi were left with the impression that if we addressed the identified items, the permit would be approved. An additional detail from the initial hearing were verbal complaints from the public. These complaints were presented by the owners of the residential property to the northwest of 312 West Main Street. The complaints were of concern to the committee, the owners of Arsa, and us as property owners. I know that we all took these complaints seriously. The owners of Arsa and I agreed to discuss these complaints and remedy them immediately. After the initial permit hearing, we met with Arsa to begin discussions on how to address the neighbors' complaints. Likewise, after receiving the Planning Committee's findings, we set out to address the identified issues. The Planning Committee's list was straightforward and clearly defined. It has been relatively easy to prepare and execute a plan to remediate these items. Addressing the complaints from the neighbor presented us with more of a challenge. These complaints were more subjective than what was provided by the Planning Committee, and we simply did not experience them when visiting the property. On multiple occasions and at various times of the day and week, we were on the property without incident. We did not experience the noises, smell, nor poor behavior from staff that the neighbor mentioned during the hearing. We saw this as a positive result. Our thought was that the Planning Committee would have the same experience as we did, and the issue would be considered remedied. As you are aware, the results from the second Planning Committee meeting did not go as we had hoped. The committee voted to deny the permit for Arsa. Prior to the committee's vote, we had the opportunity to present our case. We focused on the progress we had made on the 16 identified items and shared that we had not been able to experience the concerns presented by our residential neighbor. To our surprise, the questions discussed by the committee seemed to be focused on the neighbor's complaints. I understand and appreciate the residents' thoughts and opinions need to be heard and taken into consideration. In this situation, it is my opinion that a disproportionate amount of consideration was given to a few residents. Furthermore, I am concerned that the committee did not validate the complaints that have been reported. 312 West Main Street is and always has been zoned as a commercial property. I understand that this property has not had a functioning business on it for many years, so it is understandable that the surrounding residential property owners have grown accustomed to it being vacant. It is reasonable for these residents to prefer that a lot remain vacant, but I think it is equally reasonable for the property owners to operate a business on the lot. Since the property was zoned for commercial use when the residential properties were purchased, I believe the surrounding residents should expect the property to eventually to be developed. If the incoming business meets and operates under the laws and the recommendations of the city, it should be granted a required permit. This should not be ambiguous. My concern is that a few residents appear to be able to dictate what business is placed on our commercial property, regardless of the business meeting all identified requirements for their permit. ARSA is a successful local business that has operated in Gardner for nearly 1 year. Their business provides a service to an area of the city that is growing and does not currently offer any other dining options. They have shown a willingness to address all requests presented by the city. They have invested a significant amount of money to improve the property. They have made attempts to work with and accommodate the local residential property owners. All they ask is to be able to operate a business on a lot that Gardner has zoned for commercial use. My hope is that you will carefully consider all the parties involved in making your final decision. I ask that you consider the neighboring property owners, the Arsa Hibachi owners, the commercial property owners, and lastly, the surrounding Gardner population that enjoy the hibachi currently being offered. Before you vote, I ask that you visit Arsa Hibachi. See firsthand if the accusations from the neighbors are valid. See how much progress we've made to address the items identified by the planning committee. As a future owner of 312 West Main Street, I can guarantee that we will address every request made by the planning committee. We have also reached out to the neighbors and requested a time to meet with them and discuss their concerns. To date, they have not replied to our request. I also feel it is important to mention that we understand simple situations can become complicated as the number of people involved grows. With this in mind, we welcome your feedback. We'd like this to be a collaborative effort to address our current issue and build a lasting relationship for future discussions. In conclusion, I would like to leave you with a few thoughts. I have serious concerns about the impact this decision will have on the value of my property and my ability to secure future tenants. If a business is looking to operate on a property zoned for their intended use, and they are willing to address all the requirements established by the city, but the request for a permit is still denied, what impression does that leave for future tenants and owners? How am I to proceed with making this vacant lot a productive member of the Gardner community and economy? Sincerely, Stephen. Okay. Is there any other public comment before we start discussion? Yes, please come forward.
Those chairs are tough. My name is Randy Wilden. I emailed each of you individually on the city council, so I just want to put my face in front of you so you know who I was. I was unaware that it needed to be sent, I think I understand now, through a different channel. The email I sent.
Name and address for the
Oh, I'm sorry, Randy Wilden, 31105 West 166th Street. I've lived in the northwest, let's call it the northwest quadrant of town we're over 20 years now. And I've been tapping my foot slowly, waiting and waiting and waiting for something to develop. Well, we've done well with the residential side of things. We've done well with schools, but there is nothing from a retail, restaurant, any sort of commerce side. We've got a gas station, which was great. That was a nice ad. I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't own the property. I'm just a guy on the west side of town who gets tired of driving to the other side of town for everything. And at the same time, in 20 years, I've watched how that entry into our west side of town on 56, it used to be two just miserable looking buildings. Finally, one of them got removed, which I thought was great, and now it's turned into this, which still isn't great. I'll be the first one to acknowledge that. It's rough. But to me, it's a step in the right direction. So while I understand that there's people are upset that must be odors or something, it's a restaurant. The people probably across the street from the Dairy Queen probably don't like the smell of burgers being cooked either. But they know where they bought. They bought by a commercial property. And it's one of these properties that, in my mind, you all were just talking about a residential development that really filled a sliver that was really neat because it finished out our west side border. I just, as a passive obsession, I watch the minutes from the council meetings and I kind of pay attention to what's being done. To me, I don't know what you use these commercial properties for if you don't put something small like that on it. There's not enough space to do anything real with it. They're really small. There's no depth. So it just seems appropriate that this might be at least a step in the right direction for something to be developed on property that could be challenging or could be left looking miserable. I try and envision what's going to look like if we all of a sudden say no to this thing and we go back to the abandoned, miserable looking building that sits there. That is the welcome sign effectively as you come into Gardner from the west. It's just not a good deal. We need to do something on the west side. So I just hope that the vote goes in a way that it doesn't offend or cause negative feelings with the neighbors, because I wouldn't, I get that. But I just want to make sure that you guys understand that the Northwest Quadrant has zero, and again, maybe a function of choice. I chose to live there, so I can't complain loudly about it. But I just, when you finally start to see that nugget of development starting, I don't want it to get squashed before it can become something much better than it stands right now. So that's all I have. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Further comment? Council?
Well, I'll start since I'm on the end. Thank you so much for your email, actually, and thank you for coming up in here and speaking. I mean, you know, sometimes we don't necessarily get to see your point of view from living on the west side of town and get to see, you know, something that is hitting us in the face, which is, yeah, there isn't a lot of options over on that side of town. So I know I appreciate it. I appreciated getting your email. I appreciated the arguments you made. So, and for you coming and talking to us tonight. So I really appreciate that. Dave, one maybe quick question. So if we were to deny this, if there were another food truck to come, they would have to come back before us again for another conditional permit.
So there's two different things happening here. With the changes that we made to the mobile food vendors and mobile food providers here, remember there are trigger points that trigger the conditional use permit. Part of the reason this is required for, or the primary reason this is required for a conditional use permit is because they have permanently attached to the utilities. So that would do it. A food truck that was truly operating as a mobile use, meaning that on non-business hours they were moving it off of there and leaving the site virtually vacant at that point in time, that would only require a temporary use permit to do that. Now we would still, as part of that temporary use permit, there would probably be a need for improvements to be made to the site to address concerns with things like the traffic circulation, things like that. So if this was denied, that does not preclude another food truck from coming in and necessarily saying, okay, we're gonna operate here on a temporary basis or we're gonna meet the actual mobile definition. The trigger here has been that this is a truck that is appearing, or a vendor that is appearing and staying on site 24/7, even in the non-business hours, plus it's attached to the utilities, and that's what triggered that conditional use permit. It would not necessarily prevent another truck from coming in that says, yeah, we want to do this, but we want to do the site differently, or we want to look at this differently. We would have to give that application due process as well. Now, I will say, generally, if we were to deny this particular one, probably the interest by another food truck to be permanent there is going to wane. You won't see somebody else interested in doing that part of it. Temporary, don't know. The thing I want to be clear about, though, too, is that the action to deny here, though, does not take away the C1 zoning that's in place. And there's a variety of permanent uses that could be allowed in that C1 zoning as a brick and mortar type of use of that property. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that as well.
And then one last question. Of the 16 items from the staff perspective, is there anything outstanding? Where are you guys leaving off with that?
I think there's several things still outstanding. I think there are items that have attempted to be addressed, but were not necessarily addressed to the standards that they have to be addressed to. So we have certain design standards, for instance, for the parking area and the parking facilities that have to be met, and how they're striped and how much distance there is for lane widths and things like that. We really have not seen a site plan that lays that all out to show it dimensioned. while there are lines on the ground, and it's shown there, I could not tell you today that they meet our parking size requirements, our circulation requirements, or anything else. The owner of the business and whoever was representing them at the time made some of these adjustments without necessarily going to the code and looking at it. So even like the dumpster needs to be physically buffered visually from public view, and it has to be done with certain types of materials. So that too was not necessarily looked at that level of detail, although there may have been some adjustments made with the dumpster being moved and some other things on the site. So there were attempts being made to address these 16 items, but I cannot tell you that any of those meet the actual standards that would be required. So there would still have to be further work to be done.
Let's say we approved it. Would there have to be follow-up to make sure that those items were done?
Correct.
And do you also, and maybe the owner could tell, are they maybe holding back, totally fixing it to see what direction we're gonna go?
That I can't answer for you. That would be something to have to
There would
ask
be
the owner.
You wouldn't wanna spend the money and do the changes if we're gonna say, if we're,
not gonna be permitted.
okay.
Right.
I've already put a lot of money into the property.
And so that would be part of this. A site plan would have to be developed at greater detail that shows the dimensioning and that all those items are being met, not simply the way you saw the drawing that we had. It's kind of that pencil drawing.
What's the trigger for that then? If we approve this?
Well, if we were to approve this, I would suggest that you would add to the conditions that those improvements need to be physically in place, meeting the city specifications by a date certain. That's what we would have to do.
So I'm confused on how this even got to us. Why didn't the planning commission essentially say, we're not ready to approve this today because it hasn't been met? We were in the project came originally, it was in the pipeline, we have timetables, I get all that. But why not, hey, property owner, we're looking to approve this if you do X, Y, Z, the 16 things. If you do that, you will pass, we believe. And if so, it comes up to us. But it seems like coming here now is premature.
The Planning Commission, so I'm going to speak for the Planning Commission a little bit on this. The Planning Commission, in its look at this, had the public comment made. And I would say in the letter that you read, they listened to those comments. And some of those were noise, some of those things were smells, some of those things were issues of public nuisances. So one of the problems I think the Planning Commission had is I don't think they believed that the 16 conditions that were listed by staff, understand they never approved those 16 items. That was staff's original opinion of this case. So as they heard that public commentary, I think they believe that those issues, along with all the dimensioning, all the things that may have to happen, this was not going to happen and meet those standards. One of the problems you have is, honestly, at this point, we have a user that's operating under an extended temporary use permit because they were in place before the conditional use permit was allowed. We have granted to them those extensions as long as they're in these processes, okay? So they have that ability to stay in operation while they're in the process. The Planning Commission, I think, has felt that what they heard from the surrounding property owners as well as from the staff on this concerns was that it was not going to be effectively addressed, and we were probably setting ourselves up for a scenario for a series of public nuisance complaints that would be coming through code enforcement as this operation was happening.
So the 16 items may or may not address the complaints.
Well, that is correct, because some of the complaints are not here. We don't have anything in here about smell mitigation. We don't have anything in here about noise mitigation per se. We do have some lighting elements to this. So those are items that are outside of those 16 conditions. And I don't know that there is a way to truly mitigate those elements. And again, what could happen here is even if we approve a conditional use permit on this property in this format, we may be setting ourselves up for that complaint-driven process over and over and over again. So that's...
I get that. My concern is if they came day one and had these 16 criteria from staff met, and then the public comments showed up, it would still be a viable project. Yes, not everybody's gonna like everything that shows up, but if it met every letter of the code, regardless if they don't like a smell or the traffic or et cetera, if it meets the letter of the code, it meets the letter of the code. So if those 16 are addressed, will it meet the letter of the code?
So your assumption's correct in that sense, but also as part of the code for conditional use permits, the reason why we do conditional use permits is because we have to look specifically at the context of the surrounding property and what's in here. And that's what the Planning Commission did in rectifying that. So I would say we would be resolving site issues, yes, with these 16 elements. I would say I feel comfortable that that would address our concerns with the site operations. As far as the context to the adjacent property owners, you would still have those potential impacts.
Do we have any leeway in the CUP being less than 5 years?
Yes, you do. You can set that time limit anywhere you want to. We also have revocation proceedings that we can go through so that if it were approved and we were having repetitive problems, if things aren't being met in a timely way, if things aren't happening, it would go through a revocation process.
Yeah, you can because they're also subject to a temporary use permit also, correct? As part of this, my understanding reading it.
Yeah, there's two things that happen. So the
Yeah.
conditional use permit generally runs with the property itself. Then the temporary use permit goes with the business. So if you're looking at it from that process, yes, you've got those two layers going on there.
Yeah.
But again, there is a revocation process that you would go through, and it would come back through you. The issue would be it would be driven by complaints, by citizen complaints primarily at that point, because public nuisances are not something where we're out monitoring. We're not putting monitoring devices out there to monitor noise at certain hours of the day and things like that. So we would be looking at code enforcement being involved in that process. And I don't know, Ryan, if you have any opinions on that kind of a process versus in the revocation process anyway.
I mean, conditional use permits or special use permits, are classified as such because they are uses that are recognized as not always being entirely friendly,
Conforming.
irrespective of what zoning district they're going into. So even though this is zoned commercial, our code has recognized that food trucks are a potentially disruptive use, whether it's an industrial district, commercial district, wherever they may go. And so if you look at the CUP section of our code, you look at the review criteria, I mean, Mark, to your point, there are 10 criteria that are laid out. Staff recommendations, that's one. So, you're supposed to walk through each and every one of those criteria. And those criteria really are kind of unique and are geared towards these uses that can be troublesome in any district that they're placed in.
Yeah.
So you're supposed to walk through each of those 10.
Okay, so smell mitigation is a big one. That's one of the main complaints I've been seeing with stuff I've been reading, not only in my email inbox, but also in the Planning Commission minutes. That could be mitigated in several ways. We could put a lid on the enclosure. You can do some things with regard to circulation of ventilation, things like that.
Probably mostly the exhaust.
Yeah, it's going to be
Smell.
the exhaust from possibly the truck.
Well, no, I
but
don't mean the truck, I mean the food exhaust that's being.
yeah, from a dumpster primarily. I would think that would be the biggest concern.
I think
So-
we heard a little bit of both. It was smells
Yeah.
not just with
The
the
oil- the oil-
dumpster, but
the
it
oil
was
container.
also
Yeah, used oil.
I mean, those are, vary daily, depending on the wind.
Well, it's not just that, but also if it's been sitting for 2 or 3 days, the dumpster's been sitting for 2 or 3
depends
days.
on haul dates. There's
Exactly.
a number of different factors.
And I'm a little torn on this because I understand there are residents in the area. They are adjacent to a commercial district. We understand that. I think they knew that something at some point was going to go into that area. But I'm also always been a big time private property rights advocate in that if an individual owns a property, if they have a use that's going to be that can be conformed, that they should be able to utilize that property they see fit. So I understand the issue around, I don't know a huge noise issue. I've actually been on the property. I've walked the property. It's very tight from the standpoint of parking. That's the biggest concern you have over there. A lot of the angle parking on the north side of that property is going into grass because there's not really enough space on the slab to be able to
Right,
get.
and that would all have to be paved. I mean,
It
there are
would have to be
significant,
paved.
there's
Yep.
significant dollars that would have to go into this site
Correct.
to support this use.
Absolutely, because it's an old concrete foundation basically is what they're utilizing for the lot, and so that's a big part of the problem there. I also understand there is nothing on the retail side on the west side of town, and I don't like the precedent that it sets for us to completely deny this outright out of hand, given the fact that we do have some leeway with regard to the temporary use permit as well as having a reevaluation of the conditional use permit for revocation if these things can't be addressed. So, I mean,
I think the west side thing, I appreciate Randy's comment. I live on the west side.
Yep.
Story, we literally drive by it every day. But to me, this can be discussed regardless if this was anywhere in town, right? The
Yep.
issue to me doesn't really have anything to do with the west side. I think that's separate. I understand the context and yes,
Oh,
we don't have
certainly,
anything over
certainly.
there.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's really the issue here. To me, because there's going to require several improvements and a lot of money potentially, if they're willing to do it, I'm inclined to let them have the opportunity.
Same here. Same here.
If they can meet those criteria, I think they should be entitled to that conditional use permit. I mean, if this was residentially zoned, this is a no-brainer, right?
Well,
It's out
yeah.
the window.
Yeah.
But it's not. Doesn't look like it's going to go back to R1 and put homes there. So if it's C1 and they meet those criteria, I would be inclined to give them an opportunity. Now, that being said, maybe the leash is a little shorter and the CUP has a shorter time frame so that we can see how this plays out in case there's, water running off or trash that ends up in the neighborhood and it becomes a big deal.
What's
So-
the timeframe you suggest?
3 years,
I
2
would say-
years?
Yeah, I'd
Well,
say 3 years.
So
3
I'm
years.
going to suggest something and wait for Ryan to slap me for saying it. So I'm going
That's what
to
I
give this a shot.
I'd like to see Ryan try that.
Well, I'd probably, where I'm at today, I'd let him hit me as many times as he wanted me to. So anyway, that's because I'm coming back from vacation and I'm pretty mellow right now.
Sure. Sure.
So overall, I think one option that you have before you, I believe you have this option. I think you could table this to a time certain to allow the property owner and the business owner to investigate the costs of meeting all those 16 standards, getting a site plan, getting a determination of how much paving, everything else, because we don't know how much they're willing to invest in the property beyond what they've invested already. So instead of necessarily approving this, if we set a time for this to come back to the council that showed this, and I don't know if this is an option or not, Ryan, from a legal standpoint, so I'm throwing it out there. They bring it back, they may say, we don't want to invest that much for this use or the lease that we're getting, under the arrangements we're getting, this is not going to work.
I know the Robert's
Without
rules,
issuing an
and you're
ordinance
right.
on this.
I know Robert's rules, and you're right. We can make a motion to table to time certain to let it be addressed under old business in a subsequent meeting.
Now, the business would be still operating under its extended temporary use permit from last year until that was resolved.
Yes.
So what I would say is, if you do a time certain like that, I don't think it should be 6 months. I don't think it should
No.
be, it needs to be relatively quick so that this is addressed and looked at. And staff would work with the people so that they understand what the code requirements are and what they would actually have to do as far as improvements on that. I don't know, Ryan, do you have an opinion on that?
Sorry, I think that would generally work. I mean, we can figure it out. I mean, even if it resulted in a withdrawal and refiling, we can figure out a way to give them more time and keep the temporary permit going.
That's fair.
In that case, does it come back before us?
Yes,
Yes.
We kick
it would
Will
come
be-
directly, it would come directly back to you,
Yep.
okay? You would look at that, and then you obviously would have the option of sending it back to the planning commission or deciding on your own.
Yeah, it's gonna be on our table, not on anybody else's, so if it
I
comes
mean, we
back.
enjoyed the ping pong of the last one. I'm just,
So I've got some concerns on both sides. I appreciate the table idea, because actually that was one of the things I was going to ask about. My issue is if this was a brick and mortar, they would come to us with a site plan, and we would have what exact plants they're gonna use, what fencing they're gonna use, what the parking lot's gonna be made of, how many spaces there's gonna be, and we'd be able to make an educated decision.
Correct.
If we approve it with these 16 conditions, and, you know, stuff is still really up in the air, that's not fair to them. If we have this revocation that we can do, that they dump all this money, and then after a year, we're like, oh, we're getting a lot of complaints, that's not fair to the business owner. So I like the idea of getting a very clear site plan, kind of treat it like a brick and mortar, where we have a good, clear plan, so that they're not thinking, gosh, I hope they don't revoke our license after a year.
I totally
or 2
agree.
years.
And I want to speak for the planning commission on that element of it, because I think the planning commission, again, considering all that, they made an informed and educated based on the criteria that Ryan was citing here for their realm of consideration. And that's where they sat there and looked at that site plan that was developed, and they had provided 2 months, okay, between when this was heard in March to May for the applicant to bring stuff forward in greater detail and to a greater level. And this is what we have before us. Now, some photos were submitted of the site and things like that to show, you know, some of the things that were done, but essentially the site plan has stayed at this level of detail. And so the planning commission, having given 2 months of leeway and still having citizen concerns, felt that at this point in time, they needed to move it forward to you all.
So, this is the union, right?
Mm-hmm.
I 100% agree. Normally, we would have more details, and it would be a easier decision to know what we're getting out of this. At the same time, I think if we say, hey, you know, no, refile, get everything in order, that's a lot of investment to do on their part with, after going through this, a whole lot of uncertainty from these two bodies. And I would be very skeptical if I was the business owner that I was going to get something out of that at the end of it. So I feel like we have to go somewhere in the middle, and maybe that's tabling it, and so that they understand that you've got to basically commit to doing the investment to make those things meet the spec. And if so, then we will move forward with a conditional use permit, maybe with a shorter time frame, but at least you'll have it. At least then they know where they stand, right? Not full out no, or yes, guaranteed, but you got to meet the criteria, right? Because if we say go for it, we approve, and they meet the criteria, we still don't have all those details, right?
Right.
So it's tough to say yes with that, and at the same time, you don't want to say absolutely no, good luck, come back to us, spend a bunch of money, and hope and pray.
No, I don't
Right?
think
So
we're.
I like the idea of the table with, so that they understand what's happening here, and then they can choose one way or the other based
Right.
off that information. No, it's not worth it to us, or absolutely it is. We're forging ahead, and you know, I think this body should probably give some sort of indication that if they meet that criteria, that we're inclined to approve the CUP.
Okay, so I've got an idea for a motion. Did you?
No, that's all right.
All right, I got an idea for a motion. I'll just run
You
it
can
past
look
you
at
guys.
Ryan too while you're saying that. Don't
I got
just look
an
at
idea.
me.
I got an idea for a motion, and then yeah, I'll just put it out there, and then we'll see how we need to properly word this thing. But basically, tabling this to the meeting on July 17th. Okay, that would be the second meeting in July. Giving the applicant time to come up with a detailed site plan. Okay, one that addresses the concerns of the planning department and the planning commission, and a specific plan and schedule on addressing the 16 items that are outlined within the list of conditions that were in the original proposal from the planning commission. That gives them basically a month to complete that work.
And I'll let Ryan digest that for a second. From my perspective, then, if that's the inclination for you all, I would suggest that that property owner and business owner be in the staff's office as quickly as possible this week
Yes,
to begin that discussion so that we can go through the code requirements. Because there are things
Absolutely.
like setbacks and buffer widths and all those that have to be applied to this too. And those dimensionings may create problems for them. There may be issues here that are beyond just the cost issue.
correct.
And that's good to figure out before they put any more money in.
Correct,
If
and that's-
dimensioning doesn't work, then it doesn't work. Is Steve's proposed timeline, in your opinion, enough time for your staff to be able to look at this project with the owner if they are in your office next week?
It will, no, if they're in our office this week,
This
not
week,
next
sorry.
week.
This
Yeah, that would be this week. It would
It
be,
would have to be pretty quickly.
Mhm.
I believe, yeah, our staff can look at that, because getting the item back on the agenda, everything's developed for the packet, it would be the supplemental piece that
I
would just
wanna
be
make sure
added to that.
you know, that's an adequate timeline
Yes.
for.
From our standpoint, from a staff standpoint, yes, that would
I think
be adequate.
I like your date, Steve, because the tabling is just to basically see
give them time,
if this is serious.
give them
right?
time.
And it doesn't mean that they all those things have to be done. They just have to have everything I's dotted, T's crossed. They know what's happening. Planning is on board. not
They need a
commission,
plan
but
and a
department.
schedule, a plan and a schedule for remediation.
And then we can look at that, or we can always table it again because you guys and them decide, hey, we've addressed everything, but we need 6 months to do this,
Right.
right? To implement.
Yes.
Just a couple points of procedure. So if you table an item, what our governing body rules of procedure say is
Next
that,
meeting.
yeah, comes back automatically at the next meeting.
We could always table it again.
You can do that, or you can continue it to a date certain.
That's what I was asking for.
Continue
Continue
to a
it.
date certain.
Continue
So
date
it's-
certain,
this was-
that's
So
fine.
just changing the language to a
Continue to date
continuation.
certain. All right,
So we would, the motion would read then.
to continue this to a date certain, which would be the date certain of July 17th.
17th.
And that gives the applicant enough time to be able to basically, bring a detailed site plan that meets the specifications of the planning department for the purposes of code enforcement, okay? And to come up with a schedule and a list, basically how you're gonna remediate these 16 items and the schedule for remediation. And we would need that before we could go any further with this.
And I'm gonna just, for my sake, not so much for the motion, for my sake, I'm assuming you also share the concerns about the smells and things
Yes.
like that, not just the 16 items, but showing how they can address those other concerns that may be
Taking into
there.
consideration citizen complaints that have already been cited.
Okay. I just want to, I want to make sure that's just clarified.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, and, doing this, I know it's to the date certain, but tabling this action is also an opportunity for residents to give us emails or flood here the next 2 meetings, right?
Yep.
So it gives everybody an opportunity, which
Yep.
I know we're kind of dragging this out a little bit longer than we normally would, but it's kind of a weird situation.
It is a very
It's-
weird
This is
situation.
a very unique situation in the sense of the context of the property and a number of other things because
Sure.
of the vestige of that zoning that was existing there.
Do we, on other projects, go through smell mitigation, like to, point like the Dairy Queen and the Sonic that are really close to residential areas? Has smell mitigation ever come up in our code and our planning? 'Cause I
So the hard, I would say generally not, okay? And generally it's with the bricks and mortar because of, they're coming in with zoning and site plan and they're usually in a commercial context. They're not surrounded by residential this closely.
Yep.
And
their dumpsters are enclosed,
Yeah,
too.
it
They
doesn't,
have
yeah, they're
smell
enclosed
mitigation on the
dumpsters. They
dumpsters.
do different things to deal with
smell
that
is so
stuff.
subjective. I don't know how
Yeah.
we
Correct.
ever fight that.
And I think we just have to be careful with those things. But the reason I'm bringing it up is I want to make sure that there's a sensitivity, at least on your part, that as we're talking with them, if there are things that we can identify that would mitigate some of those smells and things, is that something that can be done? We just
Sure.
work through that
Well, I
process.
definitely want it looked at with this project. I was just curious if it had ever come up
Yeah.
with projects before and how we've
Yeah,
addressed.
usually most of our restaurants and things are in commercial areas, so we don't get that problem. And of course, when it comes to things like, I'll just call it the barbecue smokers and stuff, nobody seems to mind that, I guess.
No.
You know, that's a whole different deal.
Particulars.
It bothers me at 5 a.m. walking by Jack Stack in my neighborhood, but that's for a different reason.
So, we'll go with Steve's motion.
Yeah, well, I have to actually make the motion, but yeah.
Uh,
So do you want me to make the motion and have it written down? All right.
you make the motion.
All right, I'll make the motion to continue the discussion on new business item, committee recommendation item number 3 to a time certain of July 17th meeting to allow the applicant to bring a detailed site plan that conforms to the planning department's requirements, as well as a mitigation plan and schedule for mitigation for the 16 items that have been identified, plus addressing citizen concerns that have been addressed in previous meetings.
I'm looking to
Does the last
Ryan.
part need to be-
Yeah, I don't know if you can put the last part, right? That's to the best of their ability.
To the best of their ability, that's
People
correct.
can complain about anything.
Yep,
I don't like the color.
Right.
yep, no, you know what I mean.
Okay.
Smell
That motion sound
specifically.
Second.
Sorry, I dozed off.
Thanks a lot. I tried to be detailed on this
Motion
motion.
Shoot, second Baldwin.
That we continue.
What he said.
Sure.
We need to read it again. Formally. Sure.
She's like, I've typed
Sharon
it
will
3
get that.
times.
Yeah,
Sharon will get
that
that.
was a lot of words.
Yes,
Very
I
quickly.
Okay.
So I will.
He has a quota.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Abstained? Okay. Thank you. Good conversation, good debate. Appreciate everything. Good suggestions. Okay, so we will move to new business. New business item number 1. Consider an ordinance authorizing the city to issue industrial revenue bonds, Series 2023, Tallgrass Apartments Phase 2, in the principal amount not to exceed $9,300,000 for the purpose of acquiring, constructing, and equipping Phase 2 of a multifamily apartment project within the city and authorizing the execution of certain documents in connection with the issuance of the bonds. Finance Director Wolf.
Back on October 4th, 2021, City Council approved Resolution 2094, expressing its intent to issue industrial revenue bonds to finance Phase 2 of a multifamily project in Tallgrass Apartments. This financing approach would provide the developer with a sales tax exemption on construction materials, which would enable the developer to include more amenities into the project. The proposed ordinance authorizes the issuance of the IRBs and execution of certain documents in connection with bond issuance. Please note that Bond Counsel Ellsworth is here at the meeting today to answer any questions you might have. One last note is the IRBs will be payable solely out of the rentals revenues and receipts derived from the lease of the project to the developer from the city. The bond shall not be general obligations of the city.
Thank you, Matt. Any public comment on new business item number 1? Tyler? Council, any questions, comments?
Tyler's enjoying the conversation about the dumpster. I've got no questions. I just, we've already had the discussion on this before when we were talking about the original enabling ordinance, so.
Is there a motion for new business item number 1?
So moved.
Second.
Motion Shoot, second Deaton. We adopt ordinance number 2772, an ordinance authorizing the city of Gardner, Kansas to issue its industrial revenue bonds taxable under federal law, Series 2023, Tallgrass Apartments Phase 2, in the principal amount not to exceed $9,300,000 for the purpose of acquiring, constructing, and equipping Phase 2 of a multifamily apartment project within the city, and authorizing the execution of certain documents in connection with the issuance of the bonds.
Councilmember Ween,
Yes.
Councilmember Deaton,
Yes.
Councilmember Roberts,
Yes.
Councilmember Shute,
Yes.
Councilmember Baldwin,
Yes.
Ordinance number 2772 passes. New business item number 2, consider adopting an ordinance amending chapter 9.05.03, Section 5.6 of the Uniform Public Offense Code for the Kansas City's edition 2022.
This is something staff considers a housekeeping item. Governor Kelly approved House Bill 2269 on April 10th, 2023, raising the age to sell, purchase, or be in possession of cigarettes, electronic cigarettes, and tobacco products to 21 years of age. The city of Gardner is required to comply with the new legislation by July 1st, 2023. The proposed ordinance before you is a housekeeping item to update the previous age requirements of 18 years to 21 years of age to be in compliance with the new state legislation. Municipal Judge Lewis, Lead City Prosecutor Cooper, City Prosecutor Thomas, and the City Attorney Dank reviewed the proposed amendment to the 22 edition of the Uniform Public Offense Code and concur with the recommendations.
Thank you, Matt. Any public comment? Council? Any questions, comments? Hear a motion for new business item number 2?
So moved.
Second.
Motion Deaton, second Ween. We consider adopting an ordinance amending chapter 9.05.03, section 5.6 of the Uniform Public Offense Code for the Kansas City's edition 2022. City Clerk?
Councilmember Deaton,
Yes.
Councilmember Roberts,
Yes.
Councilmember Shute,
Yes.
Councilmember Baldwin,
Yes.
Councilmember Ween,
Yes.
Ordinance number 2773 passes. New business item number 3, consider adopting a resolution amending certain schedules of fees and charges in titles 12, 13, and 14 of the Gardner Municipal Code. City Clerk?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is really just a housekeeping item regarding the most recent fees resolution that we seem to bring up every 6 to 9 months. Staff performed a review of the schedule of fees and charges and recommends the revision of our fees of 4 different fees and charges included in this resolution. A list of the recommended fee changes was included in your packets. The list of fees included in this resolution is not comprehensive and will just affect those 3 chapters. If approved, the changes proposed in this resolution will be effective July 1st and will be incorporated into the comprehensive fees document published on the city's website.
All right, thank you. Any public comment? Council, questions? Is there a motion for new business item number 3?
So moved.
Second.
Motion Deaton, second Shute. We adopt resolution 2125, a resolution amending certain schedules of fees and charges for titles 12, 13, and 14 of the Gardner Municipal Code.
Councilmember Roberts,
Yes.
Councilmember Shute,
Yes.
Councilmember Baldwin,
Yes.
Councilmember Ween,
Yes.
Councilmember Deaton,
Yes.
Resolution number 2125 passes. Thank you. All right, that concludes business. We will move to council updates. Why don't we start with Gons? Utilities?
Nothing tonight?
Jason, public.
Nothing tonight.
Dave?
I know there's something. We do have planning commission next Monday. Again, we do not have any particular cases on there. There's a couple of house cleaning items you need to do, like election of officers, things like that. So that's all that's on that agenda.
Okay, thank you. Kellen, Public Works?
Since I know we asked. US 56, no significant updates on the schedule. They're still telling us that they plan to have the travel lanes west of Moonlight all open by the end of the month. Fingers crossed.
That will be at least something.
The end of June, like in like
8 days,
Okay.
9 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
There will,
Small
just to
victories.
be clear, there will still be some work items. I
Right.
don't believe sidewalk will.
Curb and
be in,
gutter.
Particularly, curb and gutter should be in before they.
Oh, it will be, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, they're moving quick.
Yeah.
I appreciate the big dirt pile that's on the other side of Moonlight too. It's very nice.
All right, anything else?
Nothing further.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief?
I don't have anything.
City Clerk, sure.
Nothing for me tonight.
Finance Director Willis?
I just want to say I'm really fortunate to have such great staff. This year-end process, especially GASB 87, was a big undertaking. incredibly proud of them.
Excellent, excellent job.
We are too.
City Attorney?
Nothing from me.
I'm sure you noticed we pulled a couple items from the agenda, the Waverly Plaza MOU update and the land bank agreement. I didn't get the signed docs in time, but I have them now, so they will be on the next meeting.
Okay.
Good.
Good,
Looking forward to
good.
that. Looking forward to that for sure. Is that all? Anything else? Anything further? No? All right. Councilmember D.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring something up, and a couple citizens brought this to my attention, but it doesn't come up very often. Public comments, we limit them to 5 minutes if you're here, but if you email a comment, it gets read in its entirety, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or however long.
Yep.
So that would just encourage people to not come here and talk to us. It would encourage them to write everything they would like to say. I don't know if there's direction or if there needs to be a policy change about making sure that all public comments, whether you are here in person or writing it in, stays under the 5-minute time limit.
I asked the city clerk that question before I read this tonight, so
I'd be okay if we eliminated the comments. We put that in for basically
COVID, yeah.
And I like the idea of people coming in to address, and it's not like they can't still send the exact same email to all of us, right,
Yep.
or city staff. It just wouldn't be read into the record unless one of us decided to read it.
I'd be inclined to agree with that. And also the fact that we had someone who took the time to send the email and then came and spoke as well. That's the best way to go about that, I think.
I agree.
You gotta learn to read faster.
Well, I could have. I wanted to,
Yeah.
I didn't
Well,
want to
and I mean,
gloss
that
over
is
anything.
true, right? Like, you read your own stuff quicker than somebody else would read it, and so.
Of course,
Not,
it's
Is that
subjective.
micro machines guy still on?
Yeah, I don't think.
it was just,
Then
it was
loses
something that was
effectiveness if
brought
we're trying
up.
to get it in 5 minutes or less. So.
Yeah.
Well, and since it gets added to the agenda or the meeting minutes anyway,
Yeah.
it's almost like, why are we reading it at all?
Correct.
Right?
That was all.
Would you like a consensus on that?
I think that's all we would need.
Yeah.
I don't believe it is.
I don't believe it
No,
is.
this
It
was-
added during COVID, so I believe it can just be consensus, but if that's not
Yeah.
correct, we can bring it back.
Okay, we'll go with consensus.
I don't think there's an administrative action on that. We did it as a convenience for our citizens because of the fact they weren't comfortable coming to the chambers, but I don't see any reason why we can't dispense with that now.
Councilmember Wade?
No, I don't think I have anything, unless. were
No,
you-
I was finished. Thank
Okay.
you.
No, I don't have anything tonight.
Councilmember Roberts?
Okay, I have a couple things. So I haven't brought it up in a while, but I keep getting questions about pickleball.
Pickleball.
And I know that Symphony Farms has some two little courts, and I went out there, and I heard the last argument was that it might be too loud for
Mhm.
residential. It's not that loud. I heard it in action. I think it is something serious we need to consider. It would be a good amenity for our population. It's a very popular sport. We want people to be all fit, healthy, and they'd be out there activity. I think that we need to look at forwarding this or making more plans or actions to this, because I think it's a thing.
Well, I will say my sons love pickleball. They go to the courts in Olathe because there are no courts in Gardner.
The New Century court, the time that they have at New Century is full.
It's absolutely
Yeah,
slammed.
you can't even go.
Yeah. So,
Outdoor, we've looked at the school, we've looked at restriping the courts, correct?
Right.
yeah.
That's, I assume, the most affordable, easiest route.
So when I looked at pricing, depending upon if you're doing fencing, doing lighting, you're looking at 4 courts anywhere from 175 to 250,000.
That's if we do it ourselves and not use the school courts, right?
We could use the school courts would just be painted lines
Right.
Yeah, that's
on
right.
the
Right.
existing
I think that would be a good start. I mean, if that's our
Are
most
nets
economical.
different for pickleball and tennis?
And
or
see,
are
that
they
I
the
don't
same
know.
nets?
Not
Not sure.
really.
Yeah, they're lower.
They're a little
So
lower, but not
we
much.
wouldn't-
Jason, I thought they rejected that.
I thought they didn't want to have the lines on the court.
Yeah,
They did not want us to do posts for the nets.
Yeah.
So we could do,
So it'd be pickleball with height. So the kitchen would have a taller net.
Yeah.
and I'm not sure what the net sizes are.
Well, that's the way it is in Olathe. They just stripe the existing tennis court.
And do they use the existing?
They use the
nets?
existing net. Yep.
Where's
Yep.
that?
It's on the. It's in the park that's over by Olathe West. There's a park right there. It's not too far from there. Oh wait, no, it's not. It's the one. I'm sorry. It's the one over by Mahaffey. So it's on the east. It's on East Santa Fe. It's north of the McDonald's. There on East Santa Fe.
If we're able to just stripe the tennis courts that we're using and using the existing nets, I think that would be a very economical option to get us started
Yeah.
and give good activity for our citizens.
I think, to your point, you mentioned the noise, and I think you're right about a onesie-twosie court, but if you have like 4 or 6 or 8 courts and they're all going,
Right.
they are noisy. I mean,
I
you
don't
go
think
on
we're
Santa
talking-
Fe over by Shields
Right.
and the park, oh my.
Well, and I don't
But-
know that we're gonna
No.
jump into 8 or 9 courts or 10 courts. We're
But
probably thinking.
Where I'm going with that is, if we did, it seems like maybe we could do the striping now. And long-term, we should have, your conversations with Duncan, or at least until he becomes assistant principal, about what the long-range plans are at the school. If they wanted to add 4 more tennis courts to the east side in the future, maybe then we have the adjustable nets or something of that nature and striping, and we partner with them on that. And then you have multiple over there, and the noise would already be contained to the same place that the noise is today, so you don't have that problem in the future.
And I've talked to him about some partner
Right.
opportunities, so I think it wouldn't be, in a year, but it might be in a couple years, so.
I think that the need is more immediate than 2 years.
Right.
So I think if we could work with the school on the existing tennis courts, retrofit or use the same net and do some lines, I think that would make a lot of citizens pretty happy. And I've never played pickleball, and I don't know that I'm coordinated enough to play pickleball.
It's not
So-
hard. It's
so
like
I don't
ping
even
pong
know
with
that-
wiffle balls. It's
Okay,
kind of cool.
it's like, it's not because I want to play pickleball. I don't even know. Anyway, I probably wouldn't even be able to hit the ball.
I think it's a great idea. And
But I know I keep bringing it up when we kind of joke about it, but I'm serious. I think we need to do something.
Would there be consent to move forward with striping if they're
If the school district's amenable to it.
amenable to that?
Yeah, I can reach out to them again. It's been a few months since we discussed
Okay.
it, so it's something I can revisit with them. And I can
And
also,
then look at striping only instead of the
Yeah,
pool.
just striping
Yeah.
only.
Like that.
Yeah.
Because the net will be wider. It'll be wider, but that's okay. It doesn't matter if the net's wider than the striping because it's.
and I don't play, so I don't know like net regulations and things like that, but that's something I
Well,
can look at.
It's an interim solution.
Right, but at least we'd have some sort of solution, and it would show that we're providing some solutions, even if it's a temporary, that
Mhm.
we see the need and we're trying to do something, so.
I did just read an article, they're converting like larger spaces, there's a company, and they're just putting pickleball courts in, and they're.
That's what's going on in the old price shop.
Yeah,
don't you
exactly.
know?
We'll get that, let's get that, yeah, that'll be a good one to get
Saying.
started.
Just saying.
Okay, and then my second thing is actually for the city administrator. I just want to personally thank you. Every time I send an email that I get from a citizen, you are on it and you get it fixed. I sent an email like at 4:15 on one day, and you had them out there the next day or the next day. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And the citizens appreciate that too. So
Yep.
thank you.
Yep.
That's it.
Council Vice President.
I have nothing tonight. I used up all my words on that resolution, motion. So
Fair enough. Council President.
If we're looking at website things, I already have a request, not for myself, but from somebody that I was gonna bring up anyway, that we had the ability to pay/register pets online. Right now, you still have to go in the Justice Center to pay.
You might get more
More
buy-in.
compliance.
You might get more
Because
compliance
so many
that way.
people, I mean, from walking the doors during campaigning, there are more pets here than there are people.
You're
I go
close.
to every door and there's 2 dogs there.
Yes.
Make sure that's included in the valuation.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
All right.
And along those lines, speaking of pets and registering, we were able to secure more treats this year for even a less amount. And so for the 4th, we were doing that. They have to be registered pets, and so it's another incentive for people to get their pets
Yep.
registered. So happy about that.
I was
Dave's
just
got
gonna, you reminded me of something else, fireworks. That's what that I was gonna bring up earlier. We did have 10 fireworks stand applications come in this year. They have been reviewed. We've got one that we're waiting on some adjustments to, but they will go up beginning June 28th. Inspections will be done there, and then, of course, the sales will meet the code requirements, so.
Yep. I'm already seeing tents going
Yeah,
up
that's
now.
what I'm saying. I've already seen at least one
And
tent.
it's fine, they're doing the tents right now, they just can't do the activity.
And since we brought up fireworks tents, can we be sure that we are enforcing the tents? We've had complaints about some tents shooting off
Yeah.
fireworks
Yes.
in their
Yeah.
tent, and make sure that we are.
The last
Yeah,
2 years.
The last 2 years, we've
Is-
had that complaint.
Is
for-
that place even still having a tent now that there's renovations?
So what's happened, there were 2 tents that were in very close proximity
Yeah.
last year. They are not in close proximity, so we're gonna hope that
it's only
helps
Roman
alleviate
candles.
some of that issue. But it will be something, I do need to talk to the chief, because the chief is new as to what's going on there.
Yeah, you haven't been through fireworks season in
So
Gardner.
we'll get to
Well,
that.
This
did-
is true baptism by fire.
Yeah, I just had today a meeting with the fire department and with the inspection staff to talk about how we're coordinating inspections. But we'll be getting information as we have in the past. We share the information as far as the applicant and the operator, so that if there is an issue during operating hours and things like that, police is called there, they know the contact information, they know who they need to respond to. So I just have to coordinate with the chief on that.
Can you remind us what the, setting off the fireworks, what the days are? This will be the 4th.
It's the
Second, third, and fourth,
So
from
it's
10
that
a.m. till 11.
Sunday,
p.m.
Monday, Tuesday.
And then whatever you have left over.
And we don't expect people to be Friday and Saturday before that. We'll see.
I mean, it is what it is.
Welcome to Gardner.
That's what it
Yeah.
says.
Keep in mind, we have a council meeting on the 3rd.
Yes,
Understand.
the day before.
So you're saying it's gonna cut into my shooting?
Well, yes, it will.
It's gonna be a long meeting then.
You could always just shoot fireworks across here.
We shoot stuff across the bow all the time. What are you talking about?
Hey, this was a good meeting. Lots of good discussion and debate, and I think we all handled it well. So I appreciate everyone's input. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?